Hey there, welcome to episode 133 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo, as usual. We're recording this at 1:36 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in the Greater Vegas area on Wednesday, May 27, 2026. We normally publish new episodes of the Quaggling Sand audio program on Wednesdays, sometimes in the morning, sometimes not. This one might be long. I think it might be long for no good reason. It's a story based on actual events in a class I took in college, which I've referenced in a previous episode, but we'll go into that a little bit more. If you're not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, the term, the name of this show, Quaggling Sand, that is a medical term. It's a term I coined when I was about 4 years old, give or take. It is, when you block circulation to a limb usually, you sit on your foot, fall asleep on your arm, there will be some numbness thanks to the production by Street. If you heard that, there will be some numbness as a result of the compression of the nerves and reduction in circulation in general in that part of your body. So as that circulation returns and as the nerves are decompressed, sensation returns. And you may call it pins and needles, but it's actually quaggling sand. For the purposes of this audio program, it is also a mental process as memories, stories, tales swirl around, sometimes to be plucked and shaped like a hamburger patty, or just in case you're a vegetarian or a vegan perhaps, shaped like a round donut. How about a bagel? Either way, formed into another audio program episode as we have today. EU History Class, the title of today's episode. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief is a strong word here. It's a little bit longer than normal, but not too bad. It's about 2 sentences. There's one long one and one shorter sentence. I'll read that to you, and then the links for today's episode include the usual 2 channel links and 1 Wikipedia link for, it should be kind of obvious, the history of the European Union, just in case you want to begin your journey learning about such things. So let's get started so we get finished. This might be a long one, we'll see. The summary of today's episode: I did not focus too much on history electives while I was in college. I guess we're already off to a crazy start. And while it would have been nice to have time for more, history is one of those things that can be tasted, at least, with reading and taking. I'm going to say taking. That's weird. A little typo. Double words. With reading and taking in modern day media productions by subject matter experts. Part of that. I didn't say part of that. I didn't write part of that, but if you're a Heather Cox Richardson fan, for example, she does a lot of good work telling the tales of history. I took the History of European Unification, and it was pretty interesting, and that's what this story is about. I'm going to have to go over that summary one more time before I post it, so it may not match exactly. There's something strange about that. Anyway, Quaggling Sand homepage. Quaggling is spelled exactly as it sounds. Quoggling. And then S-A-N-D, no space. It could be Quagglings and quagglingsand.com. No comment on what the site looks like. I was ripped away from actually finishing my redesign to publish, so that'll be one of these days. I've checked my web traffic. There are not a million people waiting for a nicer design. Not yet, anyway, soon. The profile page linking everything is just over 5 years old in March. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You will find links to all of my various audio programs, various projects, and affiliate links to things that I actually use, including some of my favorite coffee beans that I get from Amazon. I get some from elsewhere as well, but you never know. You can use the affiliate links and not add any additional costs, and that will support these efforts. Or you can actually buy me a coffee, although you are not required to do neither, and I'm not particularly asking you or compelling you to do either of these or to follow either of these paths. So if you would like to either, you pick. if you would like to somehow add to the joy of producing this and various other episodes of various programs, all proceeds that come in through buymeacoffee.com or for Ko-fi.com for that matter, do go towards purchasing coffee, which is what powers all of this. The Buy Me an Update audio program is inspired by buymeacoffee.com. It used to be published exclusively there. Now it is published first at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts on Monday mornings. And then 2 hours later, it is published in all the other usual places. But that's the origin. Buy Me an Update, Buy Me a Coffee, a formerly exclusive relationship. That was 100% my doing. There is no relationship. There's a profile page with my name on it. That's about it. The History of the European Union expressed in Wikipedia form. There's a link to the History of the European Union article on Wikipedia. As I always remind people, begin your journey seeking knowledge on Wikipedia, but consider not ending it there. There are certainly countless good books, articles, and at this point, modern day media content creators putting out some really useful stuff. One of these days, I'll gather up all my favorite content creators, producers, people who at least seem to know what they're talking about, who make really good stuff. Probably other people have done that. I think more people should not leave it to the Google recommendation engine to come up with, you can find, that's discoverability, sure, but some of my favorite YouTubers are pretty good. On that note, let's begin with this episode so we can get on with the week. First, some background. I spoke about this a little bit way back when in episode 51 of this very audio program as part of a broad rundown of, as the title of that episode suggests, my politics. How I've reached my political, ideological position, I guess, in as much as I have reached one. This was the section with 3 bullet items in that episode, per my usual episode structure and as part of the overall topic umbrella of that episode. So here we can go through that a little bit more, in a little bit more detail, higher resolution. This is a history class that I was taking, though it was something of an economics and policy class mixed together on a historical timeline so that we could consider the development milestones like the European Economic Community and the ECU. I can't remember what that stands for. It's probably in the Wikipedia article. The European Currency Unit, something like that. The ECU would become the euro. I believe it was that was that short path for that. And the eventual EU, European Union, and the history to lead to any of this. Some of these you can glance at in the Wikipedia article linked. You'll only get sort of hints at what you could read more about. I took the class at Claremont McKenna College, since Harvey Mudd College at that time did not have so diverse a history department. I'm going to guess this has changed over the years since Mudd has a more diverse degree offering. I think you can get a liberal arts degree at Harvey Mudd now, which is, I don't know about that. From what I understand, though, they've tried to make it more of a general, I think that's problematic, but anyway, I was the only student from Harvey Mudd College. It's problematic because the other 4 of the 5 colleges were there to enable the different colleges to have some focus, some specialization. I was the only student from Harvey Mudd College enrolled in this class at that time. This was completely normal, a feature of the 5 Claremont colleges. This cross-registration element was a feature. And I did it a few times. I took a few classes at different colleges. It was good. And the only engineering student at the same time in that class. And I did have a minor concentration in economics, which I still do. The history part. So our professor, and his name escapes me, I could probably find out if he's still doing stuff, but he was an accomplished student of the European Unification timeline himself, and so he did cover the backstory of the more recent series of events that was unfolding into what was about to be the European Union proper. I did take this class during my senior year in college, which ended with graduation in May 1993, so the EU was either in its early days or was teetering on formation when I took the class, depending on precisely how that is measured and whether I think I took it in the first semester of my senior year, but it honestly, I don't remember. it was somewhere in there. That final year was kind of the home stretch, right? Generally speaking, this was it was as good a time as any as outsiders across the pond to learn about this thing, which was emerging for real after so many years of hard work. Anyone who has read any European history or seen any movies about Europe in the before times, like anything about the Roman Empire, Persia, exploring Greece exactly as it is depicted in the movie and graphic novel series 300, it's completely accurate. Various explorations in kingdoms up north and what is now the UK. It wasn't always the UK. This is not, and some other areas, Scandinavia and so on. This is not an interval accurate accounting that I'm providing today. I'm merely pointing out that there is a lot of real history, including formation of governments and societies, various conquests and wars, all this reshaped Europe for a few centuries of note and longer. The countries and cultures of Europe had a long history of disagreement that might escalate to war now and then. And to this day, despite a lot of commonality, there is always a bit of us and them lingering between this population and that. History will do that. It's just the way it is. Oh, those people over there versus our people over here, that kind of thing. I would work for Philips Electronics, a Dutch company, of course, in about 1998, which brought me to Holland and to England and later to Germany. And there was was it 1998? Yeah, no, 99. Was it 99? 98 or 99, somewhere in there. It's on my LinkedIn profile. So I went from Holland and then to England and later to Germany and then back to England and so on. There was a trip to France while I was working for a company called SEM Microsystems, which was a German company, on smart card stuff before Philips. And I did an entire episode on chip cards. So I did have an opportunity to see the early stages of the EU coming together. It was after the EU officially formed, but it was still in its early days. So I had this opportunity to see in the first 5 years after the paperwork was signed, with some of the eye rolling and expressions of doubt amongst various people who were living through it in my travels there, along with the joys of moving around the continent with an American passport. So if anything was becoming streamlined for European citizens of their respective countries as far as border crossings and general movement, not to mention employment and so on, this had not applied to we Americans, at least not so much. I was still carrying some guilders, some francs, some pounds, sterling. It was all like a startup. So eventually the euro would get sorted. I probably still have some of that currency around somewhere. So the economics, moving around for work and importing and exporting within the EU was to be made easier so that a continent-spanning workforce and marketplace could emerge and flourish, and anyone who has looked at the EU knows that this was a lot of trying to settle on currency valuations for the eventual unification of the euro itself, which the UK did not participate in, by the way, if you recall. And that attitude carried through to today, perhaps, reaching a point where the currencies could lock in and facilitate a currency unification. That was something I remember being in the news for a while, and it did take a while. And maybe Greece didn't come out of that whole process so well. Germany did okay, I think. The joys of giving up a sovereign currency such that addressing some economic shortfalls in country were now not so easy once again goes to Greece. I think we all learned what austerity really meant at that point, if you were following along. The EU, my voice is arguing with me again today, but it's not as bad as it has been. The weather in Vegas. The EU was motivated by these economic possibilities to build a stronger marketplace and make workforce more flexible, along with bringing a larger and more coordinated economic force into the world marketplace on the whole. It is important to note that post-1948 treaties and negotiations which led to a real EU possibility were on the heels of a crushing pair of world wars, which did bring some factions together through defensive treaties and plain old necessity. But it is interesting to note that sticking together after was not automatic by any means. The European Union was not an obvious next step. Certainly there were some lingering feelings towards Germany for a while. Norm Macdonald has a good bit on that on his final David Letterman Late Show appearance. A formidable potential economic participant, except for a couple of noteworthy disagreements with their neighbors. Yeah, Europe was in a weird way post World War II for sure. After the Second World War, there was a lot of new ideas. There were a lot of new ideas floating around, including the Marshall Plan for Reconstruction and the Bretton Woods plans to enable the beginnings of a global marketplace, which I think we're seeing the end of now, and some new ideas around capital investment and so on. Eventually, we would get off the gold standard for the US dollar, among other exciting developments. Now, the petrodollar is another one. Now, these two US driven actions, and then the other things I just mentioned, were a drop in the bucket, and I would recommend another glance at the Wikipedia article to identify some potential areas of interest for some of the intricate details around getting so many cultures and histories to move towards some sort of longer term agreement. Reconstruction is one thing, but actually getting onto something like the same page, a little bit more interesting. The United States of Europe, as Churchill would suggest, was not a matter of copy paste from our side of the world, to be sure. So my take, maybe this is not, maybe it's not going to be too long. My take, I mean, in time, it's kind of lengthy, but I'm going through it pretty quickly. My take, I think we all had some sort of U.S. history in our high school days. If you were in the U.S., of course. If not, I don't know. And while there are always going to be ideological arguments and questionable details and agenda in how some parts of the big story are taught, and that's probably a bigger problem for another time, I hope we can agree that colonies and the colonists were growing less and less patient with the way that England was overseeing their colonies. That's us. Was us. And while issues around taxation seem to have driven the pot to boil over, the Tea Party was only a facet of some of the tensions. In general, there were questions about governance, economics, quality of life, market participation, especially in exports to the rest of the world, and so on. Let's face it, you send a bunch of people willing to turn a completely uninhabited, wild countryside. You can put air quotes around that because, like Columbus discovered the New World with people already living there. So people were willing to cross the ocean to this new world. What is this? Into their homes? No. So you're basically taking people with that drive, very entrepreneurial, and then they build they build their homes, right? And then they build society on top of those, around those homes. A large expanse that had society and governance and nation states already, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of humorous that that's sort of ignored. The multiple, anyway, the continent that is known as North America, probably the Americas, had all of these things already, but in a different form. It was a different time. Is it the Cherokee Nation, the Iroquois Nation? I'm totally spacing out here. Anyway, these are the sorts of people, the colonists from various places. These are the sorts of people who might be okay exerting their own imperialism of sorts on the indigenous peoples, and who might decide being entrepreneurial in the way of starting a new country is not out of the question. So you really can't be too surprised by people who have adopted that sort of adventurism, that sort of pioneering attitude, the rugged individualism of Teddy Roosevelt many years later, that they would say, we're not going to take it anymore. Yeah. To be about, indigenous peoples. That's a whole nother topic. To be honest, I have no idea what versions of history have been taught in our schools. So maybe the simplified rundown here is a matter of interpretation even. But hopefully we can agree, like the Thanksgiving dinner thing, come on. But hopefully we can agree that the original colonists in the New World would be entrepreneurs, independent and motivated. And I don't mean entrepreneurs like starting new businesses of today, but that entrepreneurial, like they did start new businesses when they reached the New World, but entrepreneurs tend to be driven and they like to solve problems. And while what's this tea doing on this ship? We should put it in the water. And while states' rights would be a major point of contention throughout our own early days forming the United States, it is right there in the name, of course. The United States is made up of states. united, and would get a lot of attention in the Federalist Papers as the U.S. Constitution was taking shape, striking a balance between a federal government and a collection of states with their own rights in the structure so formed. It's an interesting time. You should totally read the Federalist Papers, by the way. Very interesting. Very broadly speaking, while there were a variety of viewpoints and opinions, it was not outlandish to make states' rights a critical issue. It was not the holdout around this general idea. It was not the holdout around this general idea. There were holdouts around more specific notions beyond this episode's scope. So again, Federalist Papers, why did they write them? So you can look into some of that. Getting that Constitution ratified. The Articles of Confederation were more easily ratified because the Articles of Confederation are not the Constitution. So, something to think about. The so-called Founding Fathers, and I think the original founders, or just the founders, is catching on lately. And if we can apply the term entrepreneur and think of starting a new country as founding a startup of sorts, this is probably more reasonable a label. I think Founding Fathers sounds a little strange nowadays. They were somewhat learned with regard to older and ancient societies and forms of government. I've read a few books about these early days, a lot of influence from all sorts of historical details, Roman, Greek, a lot of stuff. A lot, when it was still ancient history, but not quite as ancient. So they had a lot of ideas floating around in those early days here, a lot of stuff to talk about, and a willingness to have those conversations and to begin not with a completely blank slate, of course, production by street again, but with a collection of colonies and a population of colonists who would, I don't know who wrote this grammar here, who got what they wished for. Oops, that was dumb. Bear with me, I have to get back to my document here. So dumb. Okay. Yeah, that's super annoying. Lesson learned. Don't click that. So the Founding Fathers, I never liked that term. I always thought it was a little weird. They were just normal people trying to do something new. So, okay, back on track. So there are a lot of details floating around about some ideas, some starting points. So it's not a completely blank slate. Here, of course, the colonies have been around for a little while, more than a couple of decades, to be sure. Columbus found the New World in 1492-ish. So basically, if you think between 15 to 1776, so at least 250 years of established colonies, something like that. So interesting. I think Heather Cox Richardson posted something about 250 and 250. Maybe that's what she was referring to. I'll check that out. So yeah, we didn't have a blank slate. We had a little bit of backstory, but with a collection of colonies and a population of colonists who got what they wished for, thanks to a little Revolutionary War, and were in a position, to innovate. Moving forward, well, anything was possible. The colonies and colonists did not have a history of fighting each other in the New World. Well, this would come later, so nothing like that. They were able to unite against a common adversary with common interests and goals, to be free of King George, to have representation for the purposes of taxation and so on. And that entrepreneurial spirit, of course, and again, I cannot underscore this enough. The willingness to go out to a completely new place and take on the challenges of taking over a country from the people that live there. Hilarious. Agreeing on the Articles of Confederation by 1791, and then agreeing that maybe something better might be possible about 8 years later. While these were important, the Articles were leaning heavily toward the Articles of Confederation, were leaning heavily toward the colonies acting as sovereign states. The reality of the new country and its viable future meant a few compromises regarding a federal government, what would eventually become a federal government. And we would probably argue that this is still true today, that there's still work to do, perhaps. I mean, if you don't think that right now, I don't know what to tell you. There may be a revision to our operating system, hopefully, on the horizon, hopefully. So the final project, each of us in the class were to assemble a final project on the subject of our choice. I selected European unification from an engineering perspective. This got a bit of an eye roll from the professor, but as far as I'm concerned, there were some fairly practical analogies to be made to illustrate my point. my points. I only wish I'd saved the presentation, which took the form of a slideshow, since slideshows were popular for engineering clinic project presentations, which I was now becoming more familiar and adept with and at. Though back in the day, this took the form of physical slides with a projector and everything. And I don't have the actual slides nor the source presentation, which was made in Aldous Persuasion, which is also long gone. Obviously today this would have taken a more virtual and easily saved form, a web presentation, a digital projector, or maybe just everybody looking at it on their phones, who knows. From where I was sitting, the challenges the EU was facing as it was just launching around the time I was sitting in that classroom, literally 1993, were basically these. So, a common enemy as a unifying force was lacking. If we compare the formation of the United States, where there was a certain level of contempt for the rule of England and King George, which elevated the various bad feelings about the colonial relationships above any intra-colony disagreements, which were small by comparison, to be sure. The potential unifying force from a common enemy and large-scale war ending in 1945 was fought mostly within the continent, and where the adversaries in that war were to be members of the European Union themselves. So it was a completely different unifying force question, like what's really cementing us together. In the case of what would become the United States, everybody did not like being ruled by this imperial force across the ocean, but without it, they were being ruled without participating. So obviously a more participatory form of government emerged from that, perhaps more easily than it would have otherwise if things hadn't gone that way. There were misaligned goals at the time, along with misaligned cultures, social considerations, and norms, and a long history of various tense relationships between countries these all made for a non-trivial collection of concessions that had to be made. Negotiation and compromise are not new ideas, but these had to happen at some cost when it came to currency unification, for example, but also in general. Where in the colonies, the first agreement was expressed in the Declaration of Independence. Yes, we are going to do this. And while the matter of forming a government did lead to some disagreements on the finer points, the Articles of Confederation was easily ratified by all the colonies because it wasn't much. There was still an overriding concern regarding the sovereignty of the former colonies as they became states, and that how that would be shared with what would be a federal government overseeing the republic eventually. In other words, young colonies became states. These were arguably more open to consideration of new ideas than a collection of states as countries, with hundreds of years or more of history bringing them to the table. Not everyone sitting at that table was getting along with each other after generations, perhaps, of disagreement. So lack of a common adversary and general cultural differences and tensions did not set up the best of initial conditions, sort of the fertile farmland that was the colonies as we emerged from the Revolutionary War with, okay, now look what we've done. we got to do something more. Got to take this and run with it. So arguably the EU is lacking that as these two elements of cohesion, perhaps. Fragility of the Union of independent countries is an issue when each country already exists, so that economic and regulatory concerns are the basis of conciliation. Obviously, Brexit was not a notion in those early days, in the early 90s, but the calculus of something is something to debate, consider, and vote on, as we would see decades later. So it was a possibility. After the Revolutionary War, could Delaware have just gone off and done its own thing? Unlikely. But the United Kingdom can go off and do its own thing. Britain is still Britain, even as part of the European Union. So that introduces some fragility. Goals need to cooperate for the sake of the near future and, of course, this future. Wait, did I say all this? Whereas the United States was formed, so as we would see decades later with Brexit, whereas the United States formed when? Where? Whereas the United States formed because there were who writes this stuff? Uh, there were few options otherwise. Again, Delaware couldn't just go off and do its own thing. Not easily. It was an alignment of goals and a need to cooperate for the sake of the near future and, of course, the distant future. The United States, when it first got started in startup mode, was not at all a force to be reckoned with when you get right down to it. So they needed to cooperate. They just had to, which would be the ties that bind. As we know, there was an attempt to split the Union, which ignited passions and resulted in a substantial and costly war on the continent. Europe did have their continental war, several, in fact, but between countries with substantial history. This is similar but different. So the United States Civil War was not quite the same as various countries through the history of Europe having various levels of skirmish, war, incursions, excursions. There was a lot of tension that built Europe and drew its cultures away from each other, some cooperative, some adversarial, just a different place. Even World War II was a war on the continent, but the mechanics of it were very different. The Civil War was a war on a continent, but it split one single country into two rather than being between various countries. So it was not the same. Similar, but different. So take those in order. My slide deck was illustrative of my analogies of concepts that were not pure engineering necessarily, but there were no Baudet plots or similar. But I wasn't showing like system stability from a mathematical perspective. I had no sensors, but were sort of first principles illustrated. So the common enemy was represented as a sort of movable object driven forward by the British military. Like they want to keep order in the colonies, put down the rebellion. So the British military of King George, of course, were on one side driving, forcing, driven back by a motive. Who edited this document? Crazy. Driven back by a motivated guerrilla force of sorts, the militia of the various colonies, or actually a sum of forces, sort of a free body diagram from high school physics, perhaps, if you remember those days. It was important for this victory to become a possibility to sum the force vectors from contributing colonies so that little was wasted in other directions. Like we didn't really have so much, so we had to make use of what we had, summing the forces towards the opposition rather than bickering, arguing. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but minimizing that. If you want to move forward, you cannot push to the left and right. You gotta push forward. So that is directed at the one common adversary rather than at each other. So it's that simple. The history of the countries of Europe was reasonably easy to illustrate. The bickering over smaller issues and decades, perhaps centuries of disagreement and worse. And this was leading up to 1993, so all of it. Illustrated with arrows pointing in a variety of directions at each other rather than at the missing adversary. So there was no opposition force in the form of an adversary to help to unify the direction of the individual forces made available by each of the countries towards a unification effort. So it was not a military matter. It was not a matter of a invading army or so on. So probably there wasn't quite the dire sense of disagreement between parties along the path towards forming the Union, which may have led to it taking a lot longer. Who knows? Goal alignment was illustrated with a vector field, which you have probably seen something similar as an animated collection of arrows, maybe animated, maybe not, indicating wind flowing over a region, the high pressure, low pressure, the swirling. So you'll have these arrows pointing where wind is blowing and so on. Something like that. Or maybe a magnetic orientation within a crystal, if you've ever seen that. It's arrows pointing in directions. Sort of similar to the previous notion, but this is a little bit more generalized. The magnetic field lines the directions of the field lines is maybe more appropriate. It is possible to have a disoriented collection of magnetic fields within a crystal structure, which ultimately reduces the overall magnetism of the thing from outside of the thing. And so that this is an illustration of the benefits of goal alignment between components of a larger thing and the impact of that alignment as observed from outside. So you can magnetize something, and you're essentially orienting all of the fields within the crystal, right? So all the field lines align with each other, so you get a more unified magnetism. If they can't be completely opposing each other, because well, I guess they can. It's been a while, but that was my illustration. Either arrows kind of chaotically pointing this way and that, sometimes opposing each other, sometimes sort of kind of in the same direction. So this was representing the notion of incomplete agreement, occasional outright disagreement, right? So goals, efforts to reach those goals and so on. If they're not aligned, you end up spending a lot of time negotiating and arguing and so on. This is outside of a single adversary model. So in the single adversary model, you can decide how much energy you want to put into battling the adversary. But once that's said and done, now we all have to agree on, do we want to move forward as one country, or do we want to just go our separate ways? Are we going to argue? How are we going to handle interstate commerce, which is a big deal, of course. So this is more a general, longer term version of orientation from the adversary time period. So later, the long term would be just goal alignment. And of course, if you act as one unified body, then from the outside, you look like you're all heading in the same direction. That can play a role in negotiations and so on. So where we were talking about directing force against an adversary previously, so I'm kind of restating this because I did have this written down. Here we are more general in describing post-revolution alignment of intents and goals, which made negotiations around a unified form of government in just over a decade something that was in the realm of possibility. So if all the colonies were completely opposed to each other, probably would have taken longer. And again, the articles were ratified unanimously pretty quickly. The Constitution took a little bit longer. There was a lot more negotiation. It introduced the federal government and split sovereignty and decision-making and power and negotiation of all that between the individual states and so on. The power is not granted, and all that stuff took a while to settle upon, and then had to be sold through the articles of the Federalist Papers. Like, no, really, this is a good idea. Well, we'll see if it actually was. Uniting the states was thus easier, in quotes, definitely, than unifying the various countries of Europe over several decades. So yeah, that took them basically between 1948 and 1993. It's a while. I mean, probably faster than it could have been if people weren't really serious after World War II about getting back on track. Fragility versus stability was illustrated with a ball and a bowl as cross sections in my simple slide. So it wasn't like photorealistic. It was just black cross section. So like blocks. So that with the common adversary and the unified goals, once the adversary is defeated, the union would be in something of a well or a bowl, so that attempts to displace the ball of the union would still leave the ball in the bowl. So in other words, it would settle in a reasonably stable form unless you push it really hard and it leapt out of the bowl. So as a practical matter for illustrating this point, I split the bowl into the left and right halves and literally switched them so that the outer edges of the bowl kind of looked like skate ramps. So 2 skate ramps switched so that now the outer edges of the bowl, or the high part, were connected in the middle, forming a pedestal of sorts. And then the ball that would be the European Union is resting on this pedestal. So where are we? Yeah. Any displacement force applied would knock the ball off the pedestal. The ball is stable. The pedestal is fragile. So this one, I don't know if this was probably the weakest, it was a good argument, but it was not well received, I guess you could say. Why was it the best? It was probably the best argument. Well, let's get to the reflection section. So that was my presentation. Everybody in the class appreciated it. They sort of saw where I was coming from because we were all naive students. We were trying to apply what we had learned and maybe taking a big swing, as I did, with something a little unusual. The professor came up to me afterwards and described my presentation as BS, but still gave me a B or a B plus. I can't really recall. It was better than an S, if that's what he was talking about. Looking back, though, how far off was I for having comparatively naive levels of familiarity and intuition regarding the bigger picture that was European unification back then, and then compare that to now in 2026. So 1993 versus 2026. A lot of stuff has happened since. So let's look at what time has revealed, at least. Maybe I was onto something, maybe. There was no common adversary or enemy back then. Today, obviously World War II played a role, but the continent of Europe was reasonably peaceful for a few decades. So there was no common enemy per se. Certainly there was the Cold War. That was something. So if you want to call the the USSR, the Warsaw Pact countries, sure. But that was really between the United States and the USSR. So, but in modern times, things have changed in some quick and unexpected ways. The United States, under the Trump administration, is arguably behaving as an unreliable ally in many ways, at least for the cameras. And Russia, by way of its ongoing war of aggression with Ukraine, is reminding the people of Europe why they joined NATO and why the EU could make sense for more than just economic concerns. Do recall, even though the EU has matured quite a bit, it was originally the European Economic Community. They were looking at trade and other, employment and crossing borders more easily, moving, importing and exporting between countries becoming easier and so on. So it was born of economic need. At least that was the top of mind in many ways. So the EU can make sense for more than just this economic concern. And now I think we're seeing that. So all of this has arguably brought Europe together again, brought them together again for the first time. Also, with the current Trump administration, global trade was thrown for a bit of a loop back in April 2nd, 2025, in fact. So the legacy supply chains and trade partnerships and flows of products and value were disrupted rather violently. Already the United States was backing away from being the global supply chain protectorate. Right? No, the chain itself was the protectorate. American Navy was projecting force and protecting shipping lanes, making global supply chains effective and economically tenable. This has been a reminder that the EU, as a single negotiating party for the sake of trade relations, is in a better position than individual European countries may have been otherwise. And so we see that alignment of member countries for mutual benefit is more important. And while this was not so apparent in the 90s when I made my assertions, over time and with a lot of argument and various strongly held European views making their way to the world stage, and if you remember, GDPR was probably like the highest profile thing that would impact everyone on the planet who wanted to have their websites visible in Europe. There have been additional things, probably more and more, and some of them are not easy to really argue against. Some of them are not awful. There are so many. But this perhaps brought the various countries and their cultures and histories closer together to kind of agree we shouldn't let this happen. We shouldn't have, now the lack of a First Amendment has been an issue in some cases, but the planet is a small place. The value of collaboration for the interests of the Union, possibly part of the unification effort ongoing. Obviously, the Brexit situation illustrates the fragility I had mentioned, arguably the one that received the least interest from my professor back then. But Brexit happened. And while the departure paperwork is probably still ongoing, they said it would take years to unroll all of the trade agreements and all the other stuff that went into being a part of the founding membership of the EU. Except for the currency. It was an orderly exit in as much as it has taken place so far. Nowhere near as problematic as the secession of the Confederate States for the brief period a while back from the Union on this side. The bowl was maybe an optimistic analogy for the US, but the pedestal was an overly pessimistic one for the EU. They've been more stable than I thought they would be. But what did I know, really? It is interesting to note the UK had not adopted the euro as their national currency. Maybe they were half in and half out anyway. So maybe they were on the pedestal. Though the Brexit campaign and its arguments were not great, with some non-trivial number of people who voted in favor of leaving the EU expressing regret for that vote, like almost immediately, but certainly very soon after the vote was held. But the exit vote won, and so the exit would commence. Reunification in Europe is not a new idea. I think they do it all the time. So who knows if a more stable, maybe more perfect union may come out of the Brexit experience. I mean, when people talk about secession from the Union in the United States, it always gets a lot of support for about 10 minutes. Like, yeah, we should totally leave. But boy, would that be a pain. Maybe we are in that bowl after all. It was an interesting class. Part of the beginning of my own journey through various facets of history and what comes of it. Of course, history is an important thing to learn about. I referenced George Santayana in episode 51. Those who do not understand, I think it's those who do not understand history are condemned to repeat it. Is that right? No. Anyway, George Santayana. You can look it up. There's another one from the quotable man himself, Winston Churchill. It was those who, what is it? Those who look back through history can see farther. What is it? Churchill, history further forward, something like that. The farther back you can look, the farther forward you can see. Oh, there you go. Well, that's a little more concise than what I was trying for. So yeah, recognizing and applying history. There is the famous history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Maybe. Sometimes that's not always. You can't rely on history as your guide, but you can certainly use it as input data, a guide of sorts. But you're not absolutely. That's what I have some problems sometimes with people rushing to make one thing literally a metaphor for another. If you recall, simile is like or as. Metaphor, you just say it is. So-and-so is a modern day, some historical reference, right? Those are often far-reaching and maybe a little bit obnoxious. I think, wait, where am I? It is interesting, I think, that some of what I posted posited in my final presentation is discussable, at least in the context of current events. Obviously, it took 20, 30 years to get this way, so I didn't build in an expiration date. It will be interesting to see if the next decade or so, what happens, how an existing economic union responds to the New World Order, and all that implies. Maybe the fact that the EU formed more slowly and with an economic focus to begin with plants some seeds or at least clears a path to some more intricate and interesting interactions from a military and global geopolitical positioning and where they fit into the global marketplace and so on, now that there's been some drastic change, and how our own union, born of political and economic rebellion against our imperial governance, will evolve to face its own challenges, some from within. These are interesting times ahead. I hope maybe it's the United States that will be on the pedestal for a while. I don't know. But anyway, it was an interesting class, and I thought it was funny that I wasn't like anti, but I was like skeptical that it was worth looking at some of the circumstances that might unfold. And again, I would argue that my assertions are discussable. I'm not saying I was right. I'm not going to go, see, I told you Brexit, but I will say that I think I raised some interesting points that are worthy of discussion. You can disagree. That's totally fine. Just don't tell me about it. That's all I have to say for now. I'm going to go make some tea. My voice is suffering the allergy season of Greater Vegas. Even though it is not hot today. What's going on here? It's in the 70s right now. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to go outside. It was like 92 degrees yesterday and it's 75 to 78, I think, something like that. Crazy. And it is the hottest part of the day. arguably. It might get a little bit warmer, but interesting. Interesting times. If only summer would go in this direction. That's where I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I got 54 minutes on my clock here. So it'll probably be around 49:50 when I truncate silence. And that's where I'm going to leave it. So thank you for listening as always. Don't forget to catch the other episodes. They're all linked on buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. I have so much stuff to do. I want better, nicer, prettier, more functional websites. They are still on the list. I really should not have been so optimistic like 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. But good things come to those who wait. And I don't know if they'll be much better for waiting so much longer, but we'll find out. Take care now. Bye-bye.